Are your relatives stealing money from you and you don't even know it? This is about probate fraud. What that means is in your family, there will be times where somebody will become deceased. Maybe your grandfather, maybe a parent, maybe an uncle. People die, and as a family, there is a proper distribution of the assets of that person. That's usually done through a will or probate or some other type of process. The problem is, within a family, there's also a temptation. It's very easy and seductive to want to try to take some of these assets that don't belong to you. If your grandfather dies, there may be 8 or 9 people in that family, sons, daughters, in-laws, spouses, cousins, that all are thinking, how much money can I get? How much am I going to get in the will? Some people don't wait for the will and they just take money that doesn't belong to them. There's dozens of ways this is done. We're going to talk about that in this video. Even before somebody dies, when they're sick, they're in a hospital, they go in hospice. Even if they're not even sick, if they're getting old and some relatives know, they're going to die someday, let me start peeling off assets early, they'll do it. How do we know? We see it all the time. We talk to hundreds and hundreds of people every week, and this is a extremely common type of fraud, probate fraud. How does it work? Well, a person in a family dies, or they're getting old, or they're in a hospital, and some people that are greedy start thinking, Grandpa Joe has a 401k. He has some stocks. He's got that old farm property. He's got that piece of land by the beach. He's got that classic car in the barn. How can I get my hands on it? How can I keep that from going to other family members? Sometimes they think, well, I deserve it more because I spent more time with Grandpa Joe. Sometimes they think that I deserve it more because I'm poorer. The other people in the family have more money. They're privileged. They don't need it as bad as I do. So what happens is Grandpa Joe dies, there's a will, there's a probate, and the money's gone. The asset is gone, and you would never know about it. How does a probate and will work? Well, you see on the screen, here's a checklist. It's a very specific process. This one happens to be, I believe, from Pennsylvania, but most states have the same. Is the name on the will? If they're also known as, AKA, are they listed? Who are the fiduciaries? And that's an executor of the estate. That means who's in charge of distributing the assets. Keep that word in mind. An executor of an estate is the person or company or attorney who is tasked with taking all the assets of a deceased person and handing them out as they're supposed to be handed out. The will determine how that goes. The executor is supposed to hand out those assets. However, the executor might be somebody who is trying to improperly make the assets go to the wrong place. Maybe the executor wants more assets for themselves. The executor doesn't have to be a third party. It doesn't have to be an attorney. It could be anybody in the family. We recommend, and many attorneys do too, that the executor not be part of the family. Too much, influence, conflict of influence. So the executor also might not know all about all the assets. They're only going to distribute what has been told to them. And even if the will specifies certain assets, there might be other assets that are not listed in the will. Just because the will has a list of certain things doesn't mean there may not be other assets that were never put into the will, that were never disclosed, that were never made aware, or that were acquired after the will was written. So don't go by that. You have to do a full asset search on the deceased person. And you have to go back to make sure that no assets were separated out before the person died. Because a lot of times that happens. Who's mostly suspect? Those who are closest to the decedent. Sometimes you have a family where there's people that live next door, live near them, and they're more able to get them to sign things, to maybe forge checks, to maybe change deeds. And you might think to yourself, well, if my family member is stealing money, I don't really care that much about it. There's 2 reasons why you should care. Number one is, unlike a divorce, where if the other party in the divorce is trying to steal money, you want to know because that person is an adversary. By definition, when you're getting divorced, you're in conflict. These family members are people that presumably you're going to see on holidays. They're still part of your family. You might be friends with them. If they're stabbing you in the back, you want to know about it, because if nothing else, it tells you how to live your life later. It tells you how to relate to them in the future. Maybe your kids, go over there and stay overnight. Maybe they babysit. You want to know what you're up against if family members are fraudsters. The other reason is honoring the deceased. When the deceased person wrote their will, the will is not just a piece of paper with a name on it that says will. The word will means what the purpose of it is. It's their will. It's what they want to have happen. Their last will and testament, right? It's a verb, not necessarily just the name of a piece of paper. It's what they want to have happen. And if you allow a person in the family to violate the wishes of that person, it's kind of an insult to them. Look, if you want somebody else to have more money than the will said, that's fine. Have the will distribute the money as the deceased person wants, and then gift it to the other person. Don't let them steal it, because that's insulting that person. Remember, we're not attorneys. We're not giving you legal advice or accounting advice. This is just what we see in cases. So here's a checklist: how a will goes, how a probate goes. Any person who are entitled to share in the property has to be listed. Has the number of survivors been listed? Has been inserted into all cases? Are all distributees, people who are getting the money, have acknowledged waiver of process, right? This is a very formal process. Is each person designated as an executor listed? This is all checklist stuff that people have to go through when they're doing a probate. All other persons, if they're disabled, the court needs Form P6 for all persons listed. This is something that a lot of times is overlooked because people don't necessarily list everybody that's supposed to get property. Here's the petition for a probate, petition for probate. Where does it come from? Letters of trusteeship, the will of, and the person's name, AKAs. Right? This is a very formal process. But because of the fact that the court just goes by what's on this form, many times people will use this to their advantage to improperly divert assets. We see it all the time. So if you think that you may be a victim of probate fraud, or even if you are not sure, the first thing to do is start out with a good asset search. Make sure that the proper list of assets is investigated, so that even if it's an accident, the executor is not missing anything that somebody steals. Or if it's not distributed because it's not listed on the will, then somebody else can just kind of keep their mouth shut, be quiet, wait for the will to go through, and then take the asset. We've seen even cases of grandchildren. They knew about a classic car in a barn, and they knew it wasn't on the will because maybe the grandfather forgot that he had it. Maybe they didn't think they had to list it. And they wait for the dust to settle, they move that vehicle, and they sell it on eBay for $30,000. Or they put it in their name. May not seem like a lot of money for some people, but you want to have it distributed properly. Look, if you want that person to have it, then gift it to them. Just make sure that everybody that is part of that probate distribution is on board. Because, look, if there's 5 people that are getting money from this estate and somebody steals a $30,000 classic car in a barn, that means every person's getting ripped off of $5,000. Even if $5,000 doesn't mean anything to you, all the other people, there's some people that $5,000 might change their life. Maybe they're living paycheck to paycheck. Maybe $5,000 would, fix their air conditioner on their house, put their kid in school, pay off a credit card, where the person who stole it is not entitled. They don't deserve to make that decision. It should be made mutually. If everybody decides they should have the car, fine, let them have the car. But don't do it at the expense of other people, because the will of the person who died is not being honored. And look, don't think that an old car in a barn is not worth $30,000. This day and age, classic cars and a lot of things people don't think are worth a lot of money have much more value than might be guessed. Don't leave it to chance. Prevent probate fraud in advance. Do asset searching and pay attention before a person dies. As they get older, talk to them, find out from them even verbally, about their assets, what they have, what's going on, are there any unusual things you're signing, and then after they're deceased, once you get over your grief, make sure you're doing good due diligence in intelligence research to find out what's going on with all the assets, to make sure they're going where they're supposed to go. Even if it's not to you, make sure it goes to the right person, not somebody who's stealing from your family.